At the time, I was 14 years old and in the 8th grade of school. My life was very different from most people my age because I am deaf. I use a hearing aid on the right side and a cochlear implant on the left, which allows me to pick up sounds, to some extent, although I can never interpret them perfectly. My aunt, who was 50 years old at the time, was always by my side, and she was the one who took care of me since I was little. When we decided to move to a small complex of houses, it was a new chance to start over. Our new home was on the upper floor of a house with 2 separate floors. It was a small and cozy space with 2 bedrooms, kitchen, bathroom, and a living room. There was also a door in the kitchen that led up to an attic. My grandmother's brother lived downstairs, which gave us a certain security. A few weeks after, we moved in. The routine was fitting in nicely, but there was something about that place that didn't make me comfortable. In the living room, on top of a closet, my aunt had placed an old radio that belonged to my great-grandmother as decoration. She loved that radio, even if it didn't work. "It's just an ornament," she would say. However, one night I was abruptly awakened by a very loud sound. I still had a slight residual hearing in my left ear, so I could hear something, but it was impossible to distinguish what it was. Confused and still half sleepy, I got out of bed and saw my aunt running down the hallway. She looked alarmed and frantically gestured for me to follow her into the living room. When I got there, I saw the radio lit up, emitting several lights and a sound as if it were a noise, or at least that's what I could hear. My aunt tried to turn it off, but the button didn't work. She then signaled for me to check if it was plugged in. As I got closer, I noticed that the radio was completely disconnected. Still, he continued to make that annoying sound. We stood there for a few minutes, not knowing what to do until the sound and light suddenly ceased as if nothing had happened. That night made me restless. As much as my aunt tried to minimize what happened, saying that the radio was old and unpredictable, something didn't feel right. After that, I began to notice a strange feeling at home, especially when I was alone. It was as if there was a presence, something that I could not see, but that always seemed to be close. I didn't say anything to my aunt because I thought she wouldn't believe it, so I tried to ignore it and move on. After a few days, my aunt called me to help her find some utensils that were still stored in the boxes, which were in the attic. The attic door was in the kitchen and led to a steep, worn staircase that creaked with every step. The space up there was small and cramped, with a single window that looked outside. As soon as we entered, I felt a shiver run through my body. It wasn't because of the cold. It was something different, something that made me want to get out of there as quickly as possible. As my aunt rummaged through the boxes, I couldn't take my eyes off a door in the corner of the attic. It was an old wooden door with peeling paint, completely locked by a rusty lock. I asked my aunt what was there, but she shrugged her shoulders and said it was probably just some old furniture. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with this place. I wanted to go downstairs, but I didn't want to leave my aunt alone. A few days later, she asked me to go up to the attic to fetch a box of recipe books she had forgotten. I was a little reluctant, but she insisted. With my heart racing, I climbed the stairs slowly. As soon as I opened the attic door, I noticed something different. The old wooden door, which had previously been locked, was now ajar. My body froze for a moment. I stood there staring at the open door, my hands sweating and my legs trembling. My instinct screamed for me to get down immediately, but curiosity held me in place. I took a hesitant step into the attic, trying to ignore the suffocating feeling that there was something or someone hidden there. When I finally approached the door, a dry, strong sound echoed from the other side, as if something had been knocked over. At that moment, all the courage I thought I had disappeared. I turned quickly and went down the stairs as fast as I could, almost tripping over the steps. As soon as I got to the kitchen, I locked the attic door and stood there, panting, trying to convince myself that maybe it was just the wind or something natural. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. That feeling of being watched accompanied me for the rest of the day. Things only got worse after that. Over the next few nights, I began to wake up in the middle of the night with a strange feeling, as if something was pressing on my shoulders, immobilizing me. On one of those nights, as I lay in bed, I clearly heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway. I got up and went to check, but there was no one. This continued for days until a pattern began to form. The sounds grew louder and closer each night. Commented to my aunt, but she just laughed and said that I was letting my imagination run wild. Still, it seemed that she was also uncomfortable. One evening while we were having dinner, she looked at me and made a playful comment. "Maybe the ghost knows you're deaf. That's why you make so much noise." I laughed at the time, but that phrase kept echoing in my head. What if there really was something there? After my aunt's joke, I tried to take things lightly, but the nights were still terrifying. One morning, I woke up feeling my bed shake slightly, as if someone was trying to wake me up. His heart was beating so hard that he could hardly breathe. I stood still, motionless, trying to understand what was happening. It was then that I felt something. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like a slight pressure on my tiptoes, as if someone was sitting there. My eyes wandered around the room, looking for anything out of the ordinary. The only noise was the sound of my own heart, pulsing in my ears. Suddenly, I heard a crack coming from the direction of the bookshelf where I kept my collection of Star Wars figures. I looked there, and even in the dim light I realized that one of the dolls had fallen to the ground for no apparent reason. I stood up carefully, but I didn't have the courage to go near the shelf. All I could think about was going back to bed and covering myself completely. Over the next few nights, the events intensified. The footsteps in the hallway felt louder, heavier, as if something or someone was deliberately walking toward my room. I started to leave the lamplight on, but that didn't help much. It was as if the light only highlighted the fact that I was completely vulnerable. My aunt also started noticing strange things. One morning, while we were having coffee, she mentioned that she had woken up in the middle of the night, hearing her father's voice calling her by her nickname. The problem? It's just that he had passed away long before I was born. She seemed distraught as she described the experience, saying that the voice was so real that she even responded. To make matters worse, she mentioned that she smelled the cologne he was wearing as if he was really there. I was silent, but her expression made it clear that something was going on. Even so, none of us knew what to do, so we continued our routines, trying to ignore the obvious. The nights became almost unbearable. I was constantly tired from not being able to sleep properly, and my aunt seemed more and more restless. One morning I woke up with a fright when my bed was shaken violently, as if someone was trying to pull me out of sleep. My heart almost stopped. I sat down quickly and looked around, but the room it was empty. I lay down again, looking at the ceiling. It was then that something even more disturbing happened. My soccer ball that was on the wall support fell and came directly towards me. It hit my face, leaving marks. Panic consumed me. It was impossible to explain it as an accident. The force with which the ball fell seemed directed, as if something or someone had thrown it at me. With a sore face and a confused mind, I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. When my aunt saw the bruises in the morning, she was worried, but I couldn't explain what had really happened. I only said that the ball had fallen from the support. She began to notice that the climate inside the house was changing. Even my grandmother's brother, who lived downstairs, mentioned strange things, such as the sounds of furniture being dragged at night or banging on the walls when he knew we were sleeping. But what happened to my aunt was even more unsettling. One night she woke up with the feeling that there was someone standing by her bed. When she opened her eyes, she saw no one. But the smell of cologne and coffee was so strong that she almost cried. She told me the next day, and I realized she was starting to get scared too. I knew that this was approaching a critical point. I started to avoid going up to the attic anyway, but something told me that everything was connected to that strange door. My instinct screamed that there was something behind her that I didn't want to find out. One day, while I was trying to study in the kitchen, I heard a muffled noise coming from above. It was like a constant scratching, something that seemed to be trying to come out. As much as I tried to ignore it, that sound haunted me. I closed my books and ran to the bedroom, where I kept the door locked until my aunt got home. That night, I decided that I could no longer ignore what was happening. When my aunt got home, I told her about the noise in the attic. She was silent for a long time, looking at me as if she was trying to decide whether to believe it or not. After a few, Seconds she sighed and said that maybe it was just a rat or some animal that had entered, but from the tone of her voice, I knew she was scared too. Even so, we don't mention anything else. A few days later, while my aunt was at work, I heard a loud bang coming from the attic. The sound was so loud that it sounded like something heavy had been knocked down. I was paralyzed, with my heart racing. I grabbed my cell phone, but I hesitated to call my aunt. So against all my instinct, I decided to go up and see what it was. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking beneath my feet. When I reached the top, the air looked different. It was as if the attic was colder, almost cold. My flashlight illuminated the dark corners, revealing stacked boxes and some decorations. But it was when I turned the light to the opposite side of the room that my heart almost stopped. The door that was previously locked was open again. A strange smell filled the air, something between mold and iron. My whole body was alert, and everything inside me told me to get out of there. But my feet wouldn't move. Suddenly, the sound of a dull thud came from inside the room. It wasn't a loud sound, but it was enough to make me run back. I locked the attic door as fast as I could and stumbled down the stairs, almost stumbling. The rest of the day I spent in my room, with the door locked and the blanket pulled up to my chin. With every sound I heard, my body reacted, as if I was waiting for something worse to happen. When my aunt came back that night, I broke down. So I told him everything that had happened, every detail, from the unlocked door to the noise coming from inside. For the first time, she didn't try to explain or minimize what I was saying. Instead, she was silent, clasping her hands in her lap. After a while, she said that maybe it was time to talk to someone, maybe a colleague of hers or even a neighbor. But I knew that no one could explain what was happening in that place. The next morning, my aunt called her colleague to take a look at the attic. He was the kind of practical man who believed he had a solution for everything. When I told him about the open door and the noise, he laughed, saying that it was probably a problem with the old wood, or wind coming in through some crack. But to reassure me, he went up there while my aunt and I waited in the kitchen. The minutes dragged on, and with each little sound coming from upstairs, my anxiety increased. Finally, he came downstairs with a confused expression. He said that the attic seemed to be in order, but the locked door was in fact open. He tried to close it again, but the latch seemed broken. When I asked about the smell or noises, he shrugged, stating that he hadn't noticed anything strange but promised to bring tools to fix the latch the next day. However, the discomfort I felt did not diminish. That night, something changed. I was in my room, trying to ignore the growing discomfort, when I heard footsteps in the hallway. It was unlike anything I had heard before, as if someone were walking barefoot with heavy, slow steps. I held my breath, hoping it was my aunt. I called for her, but no answer came. The silence seemed to swallow me. I took courage and opened the door slowly. The hallway was empty, but the air felt heavy, as if I wasn't alone. I went to my aunt's room and found her fast asleep. I thought about waking her up, but decided not to. I didn't want to scare her anymore. I went back to my room and closed the door. Minutes later, I heard the sound of something scratching the wall next to my bed. It was slow, methodical, as if someone was trying to get my attention. My eyes were fixed on the wall, and my mind was racing in circles, trying to find a logical explanation. Finally, the sound stopped, but my tranquility had already been destroyed. The next day, my aunt told me something that made me feel even more vulnerable. He said that during the night he had a strange dream. She saw her father standing next to the bed again, calling her by her nickname, that he tried to say something, but his voice wouldn't come out. The scariest detail was that when she woke up, the whole room smelled like the old cologne he used to use. She tried to laugh at it, as if it were just a daydream, but I could see that she was just as distraught as I was. It was no longer just noises or doors that opened. Something was trying to communicate, and somehow it seemed to be getting closer. After the conversation with my aunt, I began to notice that things were getting more intense, as if the atmosphere of the house was gradually changing. Every little noise or movement seemed amplified, and the constant feeling of being watched became unbearable. I tried to distract myself with school and other activities, but whenever I returned home, it was as if that presence was waiting for me. lurking, in the shadows. One night while I was in my room, I decided to get my cochlear implant in order to get more sense of what was going on around me. I wanted to understand if the sounds I heard were real or just a figment of my imagination. When I turned on the device, the silence was immediately filled with a low, pulsating hum. It was as if the house was breathing, a sound that did not come from any device or environment that I could identify. As I tried to concentrate on the sound, I noticed a movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked at the half-open door of my room and saw something that made my heart race. A shadow, tall and slender, projected on the wall of the hallway. It was impossible to discern where it was coming from, but she moved slowly, almost as if she were dancing. I took a deep breath and decided to check it out. I opened the door carefully and looked down the hallway. There was nothing. I closed the door quickly and sat up on the bed, trying to calm down. It was then that I felt something strange. The mattress next to me sank slightly, as if someone had sat there. My heart raced and I instinctively turned around, but there was nothing. The sensation, however, remained, as if something invisible was next to me, watching every movement. The next morning, my aunt looked more haggard than ever. She told me that she had woken up to the sound of footsteps climbing the stairs leading to the attic. Initially, he thought it was me going to check something, but when he looked in my room through the door, which was half open, he saw that I was lying on the bed. "I know it's crazy, but I felt like we weren't alone," she said, almost like a whisper. His voice had a steadiness I had never heard before, and at that moment I realized that something needed to be done before things got completely out of hand. That afternoon, we finally decided to investigate the attic, even though we knew that this would not solve the feeling of dread that surrounded us. My great-uncle, who lived downstairs, brought some tools and started working on the door, trying to fix it once and for all. He looked determined, but his uncomfortable posture did not go unnoticed, as if he was just fulfilling an obligation, not really believing that anything could be done to drive away whatever was there. I went up with him to the attic. The feeling of discomfort was so palpable that I could almost feel it on my skin, like a pressure on my chest. The air was heavy, denser than usual, and the smell of dust and old wood seemed stronger. I went straight to the broken door. The latch was not yet working, but something was different. The door, which used to be just an ordinary entrance to a small warehouse, seemed to have an ominous aura. When I looked into the attic, something made me hesitate. The light from the window seemed dimmer, as if the daylight was being obstructed by something I couldn't see. The room, which once looked like a simple storeroom for objects and old memories, now looked like an alien space. In the background, I could see something leaning against the shadows, a silhouette, a human but distorted form. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, as if I was being drawn to that figure. My great-uncle, noticing that I was static, looked back and followed me with his gaze. "What do you see?" he asked, his voice strained. When he turned to look as well, whatever was there disappeared, as if it had never existed. He nodded and without further words continued his work at the door. Something wasn't right, but I didn't have the courage to question it. That night, something worse happened. While my aunt and I were eating dinner, a loud knock on the wall from the hallway caused us both to get up abruptly. The knock was followed by a sound, as if someone was dragging a piece of heavy furniture around the house. I ran to the hallway, but it was empty. When I returned to the kitchen, I realized that something was different. My aunt's old radio had turned on by itself again. And not only that, the buzz was back, louder than ever. And there was something else. A low murmur, an indistinct voice that seemed to come from inside the radio. The murmur was strange. It wasn't just an ordinary interference or static from an old radio. It was something else, as if the voice was trying to communicate, but not in a normal way. The chill feeling down my spine increased, and I didn't know what to do. I looked at my aunt, waiting for her to tell me something, but she was paralyzed, her eyes fixed on the radio station. It was then that the radio, for a fraction of a second, emitted a word that seemed to say, "Get out." My aunt jumped up as if she had been shocked and looked at me, her eyes wide and lifeless. I've never seen her so scared before. She tried to turn off the radio, but the buttons were unresponsive. I went to her, and with trembling hands, knocked on the radio. The radio finally went silent, but tension still hung in the air as if something was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. We couldn't sleep that night, with every sound, every beat, every whisper coming from the hallway. My heart beat faster, as if it were about to explode. My aunt seemed lost, as if in a trance-like state, and I felt completely vulnerable. The hours passed slowly, and the silence that followed was worse than any noise. It was the silence of something waiting to happen, of something that was watching, waiting for the right moment. The next morning, the feeling of oppression in the house intensified. I didn't know what was going on, but I was starting to feel like I was running out of time. Each room seemed darker, tighter, as if the house was closing in around us. Even the sunlight seemed weaker, as if it was being absorbed by the darkness. When I went to the living room, I realized that something was different. The kitchen door, which used to lead to the hallway, was open, but once again she was not alone. The silhouette of the figure, distorted and indescribable, was there, standing in the middle of the door. It was then that the last piece fell into place. The house wasn't just being haunted, it was alive. Something was feeding on our fear, if nourishing, our anxiety, and it was getting stronger every day. I knew I had to leave, but at the same time I knew there was nowhere to go. I decided that I needed to tell my aunt about the shadow, about what was happening, about everything I had felt and seen. But seeing her that morning, more haggard than ever, with her eyes red and her shoulders slumped, I knew she was feeling something she couldn't explain either. She looked older, as if the days they spent there were draining her, leaving her fragile, lost in a state of constant shock. She, who had always been strong, was visibly helpless. I walked up to her and in a trembling voice began to talk about the visions, the radio, the feeling of being watched, everything that was going on, and that we needed to do something. When I finished, she stared at me for a long time, as if trying to process my words. Then, in a low voice, she finally spoke. "We need to get out of here." We decided to leave the house for a while. My great-uncle also left the house, anything that was better than staying there. I grabbed the most important things, and before she could change her mind, I pulled her out of the house. But as we left, the feeling that something was chasing us intensified. I could feel the presence there next to me, as if the house was still watching us. We didn't know where to go, but the only thing that mattered was to escape from that place. As we walked through the neighborhood, a sense of relief began to wash over me, as if the weight of the house had finally lifted a bit. However, I didn't know what to do to really get rid of it. The experiences lived there would not disappear so easily. Something had marked us, something had touched us, and now it could no longer be ignored. That day, the next night, and the days that followed were peaceful, but I knew that whatever had happened in that house would never leave my mind. I felt deep down that what we experienced was just beginning. Perhaps the house had been silent, but the feeling of being watched still hung in the air, in every dark corner and in every empty place. I knew that somehow what we experienced there followed us, and to this day, many years later, sometimes I still feel that I'm being watched. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.